let's get to this MicroStrategy here. I'm excited to talk about this. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time here talking about MicroStrategy. One of our favorite things in Bitcoin, one of our favorite things to invest in, one of our favorite things to talk about, MicroStrategy. And for the most part, I've had a pretty a pretty good view on MicroStrategy. I've been doing my best to try to understand it, like thoroughly understand it, because it sounds great in theory. You look at the last 4 years, it's outperformed Bitcoin by quite a large margin. But then you start to ask yourself, like, why? Why is it outperforming Bitcoin so much? What's the deal with this? So again, before we get into this, I should say a couple things. The first one is that I'm a MicroStrategy shareholder. I do have shares. I've been a shareholder for a couple of years now. And I mean, a very happy shareholder, I must say, after I think it's up about 600% in 2024. So a happy shareholder. And I think when I first bought into MicroStrategy, there was 17 million shares outstanding. And at that time, I was like, okay, well, there's 21 million Bitcoin. There's 17 million shares. I kind of looked at them the same. I was like, this is going to be maybe another Berkshire Hathaway kind of deal where they're going to keep 17 million. They're going to keep buying Bitcoin. And then they started just selling shares, issuing convertible debt. And then they recently changed it to be from like 330 million shares, which is where they're at today, to like 1 billion shares, maybe 2 billion shares. So it's been heavily diluted already, and it's going to be more diluted. But that's okay because they're actually buying Bitcoin to keep up with the dilution. Every time they issue new shares, they buy Bitcoin with it. So it evens out. It's not a problem to me that's what's happening here. But when I first got into it, I saw this as a very long-term, like this is going to be a very scarce share, very scarce asset here. I'm going to own a couple of them and I'm going to hold it for a very long time. So that was kind of my intention when I got into it. That was my longer-term plan with MicroStrategy. And when I go through this, like I want to be clear, I'm not claiming that I'm right about this thing. I'm not, or to convince you to buy it or sell it. The purpose of this is simply to get you thinking about MicroStrategy, how it's working, the ins and outs of it, and asking the right questions. So it's not about holding MicroStrategy or Apple or MicroStrategy or a mining share or MicroStrategy or real estate, MicroStrategy gold. That's not what I'm going to be comparing here because I think that MicroStrategy is a better option than all of those. I really do. I think that it is the second best asset that you can invest in behind Bitcoin. And so that's what I'm going to be comparing here is MicroStrategy and Bitcoin. If you had $100,000 today, should you buy MicroStrategy or Bitcoin? That's kind of the analysis here. And then kind of how I've changed my mind and thinking about this longer term. So if I am wrong about something here, I want to be clear. I'm going to look through the chat. I want people to leave a comment on this video afterwards and tell me what I'm wrong about, because I'm more than happy to admit that I was wrong and even do a follow-up video to admit that I was wrong. I have no issues with that. I'm not claiming to be perfect here or right or accurate with everything. This is just kind of my interpretation of it. And so either way, regardless of what you form of this, what opinion you form, don't jump the gun on anything. Just with this, with everything, always just like let it settle for a little while, sleep on it for a little while, and then, make a decision after that. But it's really just to kind of help me understand this crazy thing. As Jeff, I forget his name, Puncher Jeff, he calls it the most interesting thing that's ever happened in the financial industry. And I actually agree. I do. So I just want to look at this from a kind of a first principles standpoint here. So let's look at the spreadsheet here. This is this is what I got. We're going to go through these in chunks. So this is, we're going to start with the premium here. And forgive me, I'm not going to be able to keep up with the comments right now. I'm just going to try to get through this spreadsheet here. So the MicroStrategy, what is the premium? And I was talking about, maybe I'll watch this video first. We'll watch a clip here. That's not what we want. I'm going to hopefully find this really quickly, but it's actually Preston Pish and Punter Jeff talking about this somewhere here. Okay, so let's we're going to listen to Preston here talk about the spread, capturing the spread, talking about the premium, and how this thing has been playing out so far, and why the share price is so much more than the net asset value of MicroStrategy. The net asset value of MicroStrategy is pretty much its Bitcoin. So think about whenever they say that, they're basically talking about the value of the Bitcoin that they hold. That's the main asset within MicroStrategy is the Bitcoin. So why is there a premium on it, and why is Saylor a genius for being able to capture this spread? That's kind of what we're going to talk about today. Oh, we're on mute.
To talk to this idea of capture the spread, this terminology that we keep talking about. Michael said in that clip, he said, we did $1 billion of equity. It was backed by $350 million of Bitcoin. And then we added $650 million of more Bitcoin after we did this raise. So what in the world does all this mean? Okay. I'm going to try to make this as simple as possible for people with this capture the spread. His company, if you add up all the shares out there, right? Trades for, and we're going to use very simple numbers here. We're just going to say $1 billion. If you took all the shares and you looked at how much Bitcoin he had on the balance sheet, there's $1 billion worth of Bitcoin. The common stock that represents this Bitcoin and the operations and everything else on the company, the shares sell for $3 billion. Okay. So that's a 3-to-1 ratio. So the amount of Bitcoin is $1 billion. The company's trading for $3 billion for a 3-to-1 ratio. So now if you're Michael, you can just say, let's say he wants to go out there, however many shares there are, and he says, I want to add 10% more shares into the market. Okay. He just basically creates more stock certificates. He goes out into the market, he sells the stock certificates, and he sells them approximately for this $3 billion price. And you take the $3 billion, you divide it up by the 10% more shares that are added. And what he's doing is he's just raising cash. He's selling more shares to raise cash. In this scenario, he would have raised $300 million because he approximately, most of the time we were saying it's a dilutive activity where that $3 billion would be diluted in a per share basis. This, because he's raising this, call it $300 million in this scenario, he goes out in the market, he buys Bitcoin with the $300 million of cash he just raised from issuing the new stocks. And now he has an additional, now how much Bitcoin does he have on the balance sheet? He has $1.3 billion worth of Bitcoin on the balance sheet because he took the $300 million, he bought Bitcoin, he put it on the balance sheet. So now when you look at the ratio, if it was trading at a 3-to-1 before, you would think that it would then, let's say the multiple is the same, you'd take $1.3 billion, you'd multiply it by 3, and that would be the new market cap. What are we at? 3.3 or $3.9 billion, somewhere in that ballpark. And you can see what he's effectively doing is he's taking something that is, let's say the Bitcoin is $100,000. If he does this activity, he's effectively kind of buying the Bitcoin for $33,000 when he's doing this, because he's able to issue shares that are worth 3 times the amount of Bitcoin on his balance sheet. This is what we call, when people say he's tapping the ATM, this is what he's doing. When I'm yelling, capture the spread, what I'm saying is your shares are worth 3 times the amount of Bitcoin on your treasury. So issue more common stock and go buy more Bitcoin with it. Because if the common stock and the Bitcoin were at parity, let's say they're both $1 billion each, it's not as big of a value capture for him to go out and issue more common stock and buy more Bitcoin, because he's getting it, it's 100,000 per coin, and he's going out and buying at the $100,000 price. But if you got this multiple blown out at 3x the treasury, he's effectively buying it for $33,000. So you want him to do that all day long, folks. This is what we mean, capture the spread. This is what we mean by ATM. And so
where this gets even more fascinating is that if the price of Bitcoin goes up, the leverage ratio drops.
Right. So you're talking on the convertible debt side. Yeah.
Well, I'm just talking period. Right?
All right, so that is essentially what capturing the spread means. And I'm going to talk about, because when I watched this interview, when I was listening to this interview, I listened to that and I was like, okay, there's a lot of numbers there. It kind of made sense in my head. And I've been paying pretty close attention to MicroStrategy for a while now. But I was like, you know what? I need to listen to this again. And I listened to it again. I'm like, okay, I'm a little bit closer, but I need to really wrap my head around this. Where is that spread coming from? How is this happening? And I listened to it again. I think I listened to it 3 or 4 times, this exact part of listening to Preston explain that. And that's kind of how I formed this conclusion here. And maybe this isn't, news to anybody out there, but it was news to me in a way of just helping me understand it better and seeing where that premium is coming from. So I just used $100,000 here because I think it's easier to talk about things in like normal numbers, to me anyways. So $100,000. This is Saylor. So this is basically when he sells, when he issues shares for 100,000, he gets 100,000 in cash and he wants to buy Bitcoin with it. So when the premium of MicroStrategy is 3x, one Bitcoin essentially costs 0.33 to Saylor because there's such a high premium on it. So the asset value of the company of MicroStrategy here is the shares are selling for 3 times the Bitcoin price. And so this would be this, you could use this as an example for yourself as well. Let's say you had $100,000 to invest. And with the 3x multiplier, and I checked before the show today, it's 2.3. So somewhere between these two here. So let's just go with 2 for a conservative approach here. So if you had $100,000 to invest with the 2x multiplier, which is essentially where we're at today, a little higher than this, but you could either buy 1 Bitcoin or you could get half a Bitcoin in MicroStrategy share terms. That's basically how it works. So when the multiplier is 3x, when people are paying more of a premium, if you invested $100,000, you could either get 1 Bitcoin or you could get 0.33 of a Bitcoin. So, when you look at it like that, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So you have to ask yourself, like, what am I paying for here? What's the premium on this? Right? So again, let's look at this. So this is essentially what's happening here. So if MicroStrategy had $100,000 worth of Bitcoin on the balance sheet, but their shares were trading for $200,000 worth of equity, the premium is 2. If MicroStrategy has $100,000 worth of Bitcoin on the balance sheet, but their shares are selling for $300,000 worth of equity, that premium is 3. And the higher the premium goes, the more people are overpaying essentially for MicroStrategy. If you're just looking at the net asset value here, that's it. Forget about the future expectations. Forget about what he's going to be able to do with it. This is what you're paying for. Is just it's the premium on the Bitcoin. So again, I typed into Perplexity this morning. I said, what's the current net asset or the premium on MicroStrategy? And the basic is 2.01 and the diluted amount is 2.3. So this has to do with the convertible debt, the diluted aspect of it, the shares in the future that will be converted, or the debt that will be converted to shares in the future. That's what this captures. So this is the more accurate one to use. So what is the yield? The yield is generated from selling shares or issuing debt to buy more Bitcoin. Take advantage of the premium on the shares. In this case, we're going to focus on the selling of shares, the ATM, the capturing the spread. This is what we're going to be focused on here. We're not going to worry too much about the convertible debt. We're going to be specifically focused on the ATM or the capturing the spread here, where Saylor essentially takes shares, sells it to the market, but because those shares are selling for such a high premium, he's able to get a massive discount on the Bitcoin that he buys. That's essentially what this is. So again, Saylor wants $100,000 worth of Bitcoin. He sells some MicroStrategy shares. He buys Bitcoin. And because of the premium on the shares, he gets $100,000 worth of Bitcoin for only $33,000, essentially. And that's what Preston said as well. So who benefits from the yield here? This is kind of the point that I want to focus on here. Who benefits from the yield? Because in a scenario like that, where Saylor is basically getting, in this case, $100,000 worth of Bitcoin for $33,000 worth of Bitcoin, somebody is paying for that somewhere, right? Otherwise, it just wouldn't make any sense. So who benefits from the yield? Previous shareholders, the people who paid less of a premium for those shares, they're benefiting from this. And the people who bought at a lower premium. So of course, I mean, guys like Punter Jeff, guys like Preston, even guys like me, I got in at a much lower premium than today. And so that's who's benefiting from the yield here. Who pays for the yield though? So how does Saylor get it? How does Saylor get away with that? How does MicroStrategy get away with getting such discounted Bitcoin essentially there? Well, you pay for it. The people who are buying shares in MicroStrategy today are paying for that yield. So even though it sounds like a great idea, like the concept of it sounds great, where Saylor's getting such a huge discount on Bitcoin, but the person who buys those shares, they're paying the difference there. So even though there's a shareholder there, they're paying a premium. So they're paying the additional $67,000 for that Bitcoin. Shareholders are. The people who are buying, not existing shareholders, but the people who are buying when Saylor issues shares to buy more Bitcoin. That's who's paying for it. The shareholder. It can't come from anywhere else. So then I asked myself, all right, so if I'm going to buy some MicroStrategy shares today when the premium is 2.3x, why am I buying MicroStrategy? Why do I hold MicroStrategy now? And so why do I hold it? I hold it because I can hold it in a tax-free account here in Canada, where no matter how much it goes up, I don't have to pay any tax on it, which is pretty solid. But if you think about it, this is where, just maybe to dial in on this tax-free thing, because this is kind of what started this dialogue in my head. I was like, so if I'm paying a 2.3 premium on the shares only to save taxes down the road, I'm pretty sure those would kind of net out, right? Because I'm paying a premium on it, but then I'm saving the tax on it. And for the most part, like at a 2x multiplier, you're probably honestly worse off holding MicroStrategy shares in that case than paying tax on the capital gains. Right? Just think about that. You're paying 2x for it to save tax. Essentially, when you're buying MicroStrategy, when the premium is 2x or 2.3 in this case, and you're trying to save tax, that doesn't really make any sense. So my logic was flawed there. Why else do I hold it? Trap capital. If you have any money in the system that you literally can't access, the future potential of MicroStrategy, like what they could do with this Bitcoin, what kind of leverage they're going to have, what they're going to be able to build and create with it, that's kind of exciting to me. And it's interesting. It's just interesting to me. Like I love looking at this. I love, the fact that this is a thing right now. It's interesting. Why do other people hold it? Well, it's convenient exposure to Bitcoin. I think that that's probably the main reason why a lot of people, especially the big capital, because if you think about other companies, other entities and organizations, most of these companies cannot buy and hold Bitcoin yet. They can't. It's written in the regulations that they cannot hold. Well, I shouldn't say they can't hold it, but it's not in their approved assets that they can hold. So it's very convenient way for people to buy Bitcoin. That's why people are paying a premium for it, because it's literally the only way that they can do it for a lot of companies and entities. And the volatility. When an asset's going 60% up, 60% down, it's volatile. You can make money off of going long, going short, kind of combination of the two. Volatility is opportunity for traders, for investors. And a lot of these funds haven't been performing that well. So they see MicroStrategy as like a way to kind of capture back some of the losses that they've had in other spots. Okay, so let's get to some of the pros and cons here of MicroStrategy, because this is important. This is what I wanted to really focus in on here. So the pros. This is what I like to think about MicroStrategy as. It's the only highway that's open. So especially where I am right now, where a lot of the highways have been closed for the last couple of weeks here. Think about a highway, which is generally, fairly busy, but all the other ones, it snowed, all the other ones are closed. So what's going to happen? That highway is going to be very busy. It's going to be very active. There's going to be a lot of people using that highway because it's the only one you can get to where you want to go. And in this case, it would be people who want Bitcoin, but can't buy it. So they're going to take this highway called MicroStrategy and able to access this exposure to Bitcoin. So I shouldn't say it's the only highway that's open, but I think it's the most attractive highway that's open. It's volatile. So again, I just talked about it. That is opportunity for traders, for investors. Whenever there's a lot of swings, you can time that properly, or you can try to. You might get burned, but you can try to. There's a lot of long-term holders here within MicroStrategy, which means that very similar to Bitcoin, I think, as more and more companies buy Bitcoin, as more and more countries buy Bitcoin, they take that asset and they put it away for a while, which means that there's less of it circulating, which means that, you know, the more demand, the less for sale, the price goes up. So long-term holders, very knowledgeable holders too. That's what I like about MicroStrategy, honestly, the most, is like the people who own MicroStrategy, the people who talk about MicroStrategy are very knowledgeable. They understand Bitcoin, they understand economics, they understand finance, they understand a lot of different components here. They're very knowledgeable people for the most part, 80% of them anyways. Also a very knowledgeable management team. It seems like Saylor is, here, let me add this too as well. Let's put very focused and transparent for the most part. We're going to leave out transparent because I kind of counteract myself. Very focused though. Very knowledgeable team, very focused on Bitcoin. They know what they want to do. They know how to get there. And they've been doing things every day, every week, every month to do that. So that's a plus. You want the people who are making the decisions to, you know, have a very good understanding of it, of the path and the strategy. Tax-free gains is a big pro for sure, especially for money that's trapped in the system. Tax-free gains is a big deal. If you can hold it in a TFSA in Canada here or a HSA in America, that's a big deal. It's the fastest horse in the race right now. So there's a lot of companies in the last couple of months who have been adding Bitcoin to their treasury, but MicroStrategy has been doing it since 2020. They have over 450,000 Bitcoin on their balance sheet. They're the fastest horse. They're going to win this race. There's no other company, probably no other country who's going to get to this level of Bitcoin. So that's a big deal as well. And there's tons of current demand. Every debt offering that Saylor has done so far has been well oversubscribed, which means that if he says he's offering a $1 billion convertible note, he has more people. I mean, the majority of them have been oversubscribed, which means there's more demand than MicroStrategy is willing to supply. So that's also a big deal. And it's very convenient. Think about the process of somebody wanting exposure to Bitcoin. You got two options here. You can either learn how to buy it, you can learn how to store it, you can take the full responsibility of doing that, or you can just log into your share account and click buy and sell. Pretty convenient for people. So that's important too. That has a lot to do with the demand for it. The cons, the premium. That's a pretty big one to me, the premium. So you really have to pay attention to, if you're going to be investing in MicroStrategy, you want to make sure that you're buying it below the moving average of the premium for sure, minimum. So the premium is a con for sure, because you're essentially putting money in and you're getting less Bitcoin overall than you otherwise would have if you just would have bought Bitcoin. The counterparty risk from MicroStrategy. So you're buying these shares, you trust Saylor, I think most people do, but you're trusting them to hold that Bitcoin for you and that they're not going to lose that Bitcoin. So you're trusting Saylor, you're trusting MicroStrategy with your Bitcoin, essentially, a lot less of your Bitcoin too. And then there's the counterparty risk from the brokerage. So what if the brokerage is selling more shares than they have? I'm sure it's happening. You know how the stock market works. So there's counterparty risk from the brokerage in the fact that it's one-to-one with shares issued versus shares that have a claim to it, essentially. So I have no doubt that there's way more claims to the shares than shares exist. No doubt about that. That's how the whole system works. So that's another counterparty risk. Permission to hold. I could try to log into my trading account tomorrow and I might be blocked. Maybe Trudeau watched my podcast this week and he decided, you know what, this guy's cut off. So he contacts my brokerage, they lock my account, my funds are frozen. Not a high risk of happening, but it's not zero. That's the point of this, right? So I need permission to hold the asset from somebody else. Another con, you're feeding the system. Bitcoin is designed to get rid of this manipulation, get rid of this bullshit. And every dollar that you put to Wall Street, to the stock market, you're keeping that system going. You're funding it for a little while longer. And finally, no proof of reserves. This is a big one for me. I would like to see an address or 10 addresses that MicroStrategy holds with the Bitcoin that agrees to Saylor's tweets. I don't think that that's too much to ask. Being a Bitcoiner, that's kind of the whole ethos here in Bitcoin, is you don't trust, verify. So I would like to see the proof of reserves from MicroStrategy. All right, so these opportunities, threats, and then I'm going to talk about the conclusions here. So the opportunities. Leverage, the world's best capital, they got the most of it. That's a huge opportunity and something that we can't fathom yet. I'm sure Saylor can't even fathom yet. So that's an opportunity. It's interesting to me. I have no idea how this is going to play out, but when you're holding the most of the world's best capital, that's a big opportunity. Other options at their disposal as well, besides debt and ATM offerings here. So issuing shares, selling them, buying Bitcoin. They're going to have more. And I think that they're actually looking at preferred share issuance right now. So that's another, they have a lot of tools at their disposal for helping keep this highway open from capital trapped in the system that wants exposure to Bitcoin. That's their game. And they got lots of options for it. They're very agile too, able to change course. Saylor's the biggest shareholder. I think that he has basically influence over what happens. That's why they were able to move this fast. So they're very agile and able to change if needed. And I really believe that the demand for MicroStrategy will go up before it goes down, because there's still a lot of capital out there who wants Bitcoin, but they have no way of buying it. So I do think that for the next couple of years, I don't know how long, but the demand will be there before it starts to drop. So in terms of timing this, that's another big deal there. So a threat to me, the demand for MicroStrategy will go down eventually. Why? Just think about it like highways. Eventually the highways around it will open up. They'll be cleared from the snow, and the demand for that highway will go down. Because as these big companies, big entities that have been using MicroStrategy as this highway, they'll eventually start holding Bitcoin. I think it's pretty safe to assume that. And the reason they're paying a premium on MicroStrategy is because they can't do it right now. So there will come a day where the entities that are buying MicroStrategy shares, paying a premium on that, those companies will eventually one day hold their own Bitcoin. They won't have a need for this anymore. So there'll be less buyers and debt issuers as they start holding their own treasury, or I put treasure here, I guess same kind of thing. Think of it like a treasure. And another threat is unfriendly government. It's great today, but 4 years from now, who knows? They could go after MicroStrategy. They could, in 4 years, and 8 years, and 20 years, they could say, you know what, MicroStrategy, you're too big. Well, do I think this will happen? No, but it's still not a 0% chance. So here's my conclusion here. There's still opportunity to outperform Bitcoin because there's still other highways that are closed right now. So even though the NAV's at about 2.3, I do expect that the NAV, the premium there, to keep going up. And so when you're buying in, you want the premium to go up after you. That's the whole kind of game here as an investor. I think that there's still opportunity to outperform Bitcoin because it will be continually added to funds. It was just added to the QQQ about a month ago. It'll get added to the S&P 500 eventually here. As Bitcoin goes up, it'll start getting added more and more of these funds and indexes. So there's still opportunity here for sure. And those are going to be forced buyers essentially and completely inelastic to the price of it. They're just going to be buying. Any indexes that hold MicroStrategy, they're just going to be buying shares. Constant forced buyer, which is a big deal. It is the best place for capital that's trapped in the existing system. Again, I'm not comparing MicroStrategy to Apple or MicroStrategy to NVIDIA. I think that MicroStrategy is by far a better bet than those ones. I'm comparing it to Bitcoin here though. So if you do have capital that's trapped in the system that you literally cannot take out of, then yes, MicroStrategy is great. So this is kind of what I was getting at. Is the tax paid if you sell or if you sell it or the capital gains remain? I think that the capital gains are probably going to go away here on Bitcoin, but the tax paid is less than the premium you pay for the stock, which is kind of backwards when you really think about it, especially if you're buying it just for the tax gain here or the tax-free part of it. Because you're paying 2x, you're going to have to be paying over 50% tax rate in order for that to level out, right? Just think about it objectively there. It is better than any other form of capital except Bitcoin. And if you look at the tax considerations here, so to me, it's not a long-term hold anymore. That's how I don't see it as long-term hold anymore. I think that there's going to be demand for it still for the next couple of years as the premium probably continues to go up. But it's not something I'm going to hold forever anymore. And I think that this is the biggest part here. Be your own sailor for your family. Because I'm kind of thinking about this, like the opportunities here for MicroStrategy, holding Bitcoin, they're going to have so much leverage, all this stuff. I want to be a part of it, but I'm paying for that. I'm paying a lot for that, to be a premium in that. So if you just look at it like, okay, well, if Sailor's going to be able to do great things by holding Bitcoin, why can't I? Think about how much more powerful holding Bitcoin is compared to shares in another company. So I want you to think about being the sailor of your own family and taking custody of your Bitcoin instead of holding shares for somebody else. So that's kind of my analysis here on MicroStrategy. I didn't get through any of the comments here, which I apologize for. I would like to see all of them, but I don't have time for them right now. I got to hop off the call right here. But I'm interested. Again, let me know what you think. Let me know what I got wrong. I'm more than happy to address it and make a revision to the video if needed. But that's kind of my take on it. So I'm going to keep holding it, but I'm slowly going to cash it in for Bitcoin, because Bitcoin to me is a far superior asset. If you believe in MicroStrategy, then you definitely believe in Bitcoin, and you want to be able to take custody of it. You want to be able to skip that premium that others have to pay because they can't hold their own Bitcoin. I think you should be taking steps towards selling your MicroStrategy for Bitcoin over the coming years, anytime you can anyways, unless it's trapped in there. So that's my analysis for today. Hope you enjoyed it.